welcome to Dear Katie, the podcast that amplifies courageous voices and real stories of resilience, healing, and hope after trauma. Inspired by the many letters Katie has received over the last 20 years, each week she interviews survivors, healers, and experts to honor their stories and explore the many paths to healing and hope. Before we begin, please know, many episodes of Dear Katie cover sensitive topics related to sexual violence, trauma, and recovery. Listen with care and take the space you need to take care of yourself. Your well-being is what matters most. Now, let's join Katie and today's guest for a conversation that matters.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. As you know, I'm Katie Kessner, your host, and self-care always important. Just a quick reminder, and you're going to enjoy today. It's a part 2 of Winnie Li's interview. So don't hesitate to go back and listen to the first part. Today, we're going to definitely delve into the second half of her life with the healing and the writing and all the good things she did to really grow strong after her experience. I'm going to recap her bio for you all. Dr. Winnie M Li is an author, activist, and educator, a former filmmaker. Winnie's life and career trajectory were severely disrupted at the age of 29. She became the victim of a violent stranger rape in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Her debut novel, Dark Chapter, came out in 2017. It is a fictional reimagining of that assault and its aftermath from the perspective of both the victim and the perpetrator. Her subsequent novels, Complicit, came out in 22, and What We Left Unsaid came out in 25 more recently, also addressed the legacy of trauma in workplaces and in families. Winnie's PhD research at the London School of Economics explored the emotional labor of public rape survivors, and she is now an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Birmingham in the UK. So welcome back, Winnie. Good to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me back, Katie.
Yeah, for sure. And I know everyone has raved so far about part 1, so I'm glad we're doing this. I think actually talking about all the 3 books would be really fascinating and how they weave into your healing journey. So where would you like to start?
So I forgot where we left off, because I think we spoke about the trial that was scheduled, right, for my perpetrator.
Yes.
And so what ended up happening was at the last minute. So this would have been a year after my assault. So the assault was 2008, and then the trial was scheduled for early 2009. And just, it was like the worst time of my life, just because the thought of having to go, in person and to sit in a courtroom in front of my perpetrator was horrifying. So at the very last minute, he pleaded guilty. So I didn't actually have to sit through a trial, but I had to go through the whole waiting process and fly all the way back to Northern Ireland for that. And when I decided to write my novel, I wrote a courtroom scene, right? So it was I was using fiction to kind of reimagine my assault, but the assault itself pretty much stayed the same in the book as it was for me in real life. But I wanted to use fiction to imagine the life of the perpetrator, but then also imagine what would have happened if it had gone to trial. So for me, that was, an interesting exercise in my own imagination, I suppose, but also an exercise in empathy, because I was trying to create the perpetrator character to be kind of empathetic, or at least to the point where you can understand why he made the choices he did because of his upbringing and because of, the way he'd been treated by other people. But then also the courtroom scene I thought was quite important, because I don't think, most people realize how stressful it is for a rape victim to have to go through that entire process, and how dehumanizing, the whole legal process can be for a rape victim, and often it isn't very rewarding either. So I think I wanted to sort of bring that to life and just kind of show like the huge emotional toll that that the criminal justice system brings onto to rape survivors and victims.
Hey, Winnie, as I was thinking about what you were saying, getting inside the rapist mindset, did you find that in and of itself an exercise that was very difficult, or helped to almost talk yourself through as a survivor that this is still a very human crime? I don't know. I guess that's such a fascinating part of what you did that I think is so unusual, is trying to, maybe it's kind of like restorative practices a little bit, but you're doing it by yourself. It's like a one-sided restorative practice.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So the question is, was it kind of was there an element of restorative?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be, and I've since had conversations with people that study restorative justice about kind of how the creative practice of writing my novel was in its own way, like sort of emotionally restorative, and some of that was, in real life, I never want to see my perpetrator again, right? Like that person, came into my life for one afternoon, changed the course of it, and again, I'm lucky as a victim of a stranger rape that I can make that kind of clear cut kind of separation from my perpetrator. But I was always curious what had gone through this person's mind. And he was a 15-year-old boy when he assaulted me. So there's also that issue of like what had happened in his life in the 15 years prior that had led him to being so violent towards, a random stranger. So I wanted to imagine what his life had been like, and that meant having to see him as a human being. And I think there is such a tendency, particularly in the media, to kind of say all these people are monsters, right? Rapists are monsters and they're not human. When we know that people that live next door to us, that work with us, that are our friends, that are in our families can be perpetrators. So, I don't find it particularly helpful to say like, oh, they're monsters and like, that they're on the other side, they're beyond the pale, when, obviously there's a lot in our human society that leads people to behaving like this. So I think I wanted to imagine his life, and that meant having to find some empathy for him, not as a rapist, but maybe as a young child who was treated a certain way, who maybe grew up in an abusive family, or as a young boy who was exposed to certain ideas about women, and maybe, probably didn't have sexual education in school, right? And didn't have, good role models. So, yeah. So in some ways it was difficult, but then actually the writing of the novel was more difficult when I had to write about Vivian's perspective. And Vivian was kind of the me character. She's the victim character, because that meant there wasn't actually that much room for creativity there, because I was I so much wanted to capture kind of the real life experience. I was like, well, I'll just take like the worst period of my life and turn it into, fiction. But it was very nonfiction in that sense. Whereas with Johnny, who was the perpetrator character, I could imagine things, right? And so being able to exercise my own imagination was in some ways restorative, because it allowed me to think about him as a human being and try to make sense of his behavior. But it was also artistically kind of freeing, because I was just allowed to kind of, do whatever with fiction, right? Even though, for me as a victim, there are certain, I'm not going to sexualize like the rape or anything like that, right? There are certain kind of standards as to how I wanted to portray the assault itself and the trauma. But I suppose, there was also an element of gaining mastery over that experience. So as the author, I was like, oh no, actually, I'm sort of in control of this whole process. And that's, I hate using the word empowering, but, that was empowering in a certain way, right? Because the very definition of rape is you don't have any power, you don't have any control. Now, I'm like, oh no, I can control the way I decide to write this book. So, but I did have to wait, 5.5 years after the assaults before I was able to start writing it.
Yeah. I guess that's an important point, Winnie, is how soon did you even think about writing afterwards? I mean, you said 5.5 years to start writing, but had you like struggled with the idea, or was it, you were ready? Like, was there a pick up the pen, kind of, and set it back down? I'm curious about that, because once you get started, I'm certain you're someone who doesn't stop, right? You're going to finish what you start.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself, how hard was it? And why do you think you were ready after 5 years?
Well,
5.5.
I came up with the idea for the book just a few weeks after the assault, right? And I think some of that is,
okay.
Yeah, but I knew I wasn't going to be ready for years, right? So, and some of it was just, as I suppose as an artist, I mean, I've always been a writer, but it was only with this book that I started taking the writing actually quite seriously. So shortly after the assault, I was just struck by how different our lives were, right? Because I'm middle class and went to a good school. You had a good education and kind of have all those privileges that come with that. Yeah, and yes, I'm a person of color, and yes, I live abroad. So, so there's a part of me always kind of feeling like I'm on the outside of society. But then you have this perpetrator character who is 15 years old, and he was an Irish traveler who definitely lived like in a marginalized place in Irish society. And he hadn't had any formal education or much of it. He was illiterate, I found out. So I was just struck by how different our lives were. And yet you kind of have our lives crossing in this moment of violence, and our lives aren't the same afterwards. So I was kind of just struck by that, those like sociological aspects of it. And so I remember thinking like, okay, this would be a really good idea for a book, even though, it's also deeply tied to my own trauma. And something was like, okay, so something in me said like, I need to file this away as an idea for a book, but like, I know I'm not at the point in my life where I'm ready to write it. But I did sit down randomly and I wrote what ended up becoming the prologue for the book. So if you open that chapter, that prologue I wrote pretty much fully intact in like 30 minutes when I sat down. It just kind of came out of me. So it's one of those things where as artists, like we talk about being in the flow or being in this white heat of creation. And that did happen to me. I remember reading it and being like, oh, that's pretty good writing, right? And I sat around to my friends and like, that's really good writing. And I was like, yeah. And even though I was writing about my assault, I was writing about it from the viewpoint of somebody looking back on it years later. So, which was strange because I'd only written it like a few weeks after the assault. But maybe there's something about like projecting myself into the future and thinking that at some point I'll get through the next few years and I'll be able to look back on it with greater distance. But it was really reassuring to be like, despite everything that's happened, I can still write. And if I can still write, then I am still me on some level, right? So I kind of saved that on my computer and I said, okay, I'm going to turn this into a book somewhere down the line, and I just have to wait until I'm at the right point. And so for me, it was just having to do, a lot of the usual therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and just like putting my life back together because I wasn't able to work. So I was adrift for a long time because I
Did you do that EDMR?
didn't.
No.
Everyone like raves about it.
I was like, we've been talking about that on the show a lot, and a couple of the people who do it, they've been on, and they're like, it's a miracle worker, for trauma. So I was curious, like, the way your brain works, I don't know how you would have responded, but you never know.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah, I've never tried. I mean, I remember somebody mentioning it, and maybe I did like a trial session of it, but like I never really had a sustained EDMR treatment, so I can't really say I've actually had it. I mean, for me, it was cognitive behavior therapy that helped a fair amount, even though some people, again, it doesn't work for everybody. But there was a part of the cognitive behavior therapy which was like, I had to record myself, and this is back in the day of like audio tapes, right? So I had to like record myself, narrating my assaults, which obviously is like not something anybody really wants to do, especially if it's like fresh, if it's pretty fresh. But I had to narrate it and record myself narrating it, and then listen back to my recording and just take a note of when was the most stressful period in that narration process, right? So for me, it was when I was being choked in the story, right? Because that's, I was being choked and couldn't breathe, right? And that's pretty terrifying, right? So, and it was kind of that moment where I was like, okay, I give up. Like I'm not going to struggle anymore. Just have what you want, right? But there was something that was, and so we took that moment, and so then I had to listen to it again, and then I had to like tell it again, and my therapist was like, okay, so what is so terrifying about thinking that you're going to die, that you can't breathe? I'm like, well, I thought I was going to die, and she's like, and I know this sounds obvious, but like, what is so terrible about dying? And I'm like, well, I guess it would mean I wouldn't be able to do all the things I want to do in my life, which is, I don't know, I'd like to write a book, and I'd like to travel the world, and I'd like to maybe one day meet somebody and have a family and become a mother. And so I kind of listed all the things I hoped I could do in my life, and that was kind of at the age of 29, and why it would have been terrible to die at the age of 29, right? And so she said, well, okay, well, the thing is you're alive now, right? So all those things that you thought you might lose by dying, you can still do. So we kind of like wrote all those things down, like, I might not be able to live. And she's like, well, I might not be able to write a book. And she said, so now you can say, I can write a book still, right? And you can go back to having a career. You can still travel the world, right? So I took it pretty literally, because I was then like, okay, I'm going to do this, right?
Yeah, there you go. Here I come.
So I started traveling like I started trying to travel, because again, remember, like, travel is really important to me. So I started trying to travel like a few months after my assault, and I kind of did. did, but I didn't really feel like as confident, understandably, as I had been before the assault. But then a year and a half after the assault, I was backpacking through Southeast Asia on my own, partly because I was like, well, I want to travel. And what obviously the game changer was a year after the assault, he pleaded guilty. So I was able to kind of draw a line under the whole legal process. And he was in jail at that point. He was sentenced. I flew over to Belfast for the sentencing, and I was there. I was weird. I was sitting in the same row as his parents or his father, and it was very weird.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going to speak to this person, but like I knew it was his father, and like I'm the rape victim. Just sitting a few seats further down. But he was sentenced to 8 years in prison, which again seems quite light by American standards, but it's actually quite heavy by British standards. Interpret that however you will, right? So I was able to say, like, I've done, my responsibility for the criminal justice system. He's in jail now for a few years, and I can just move on with my life, right? But again, that's very few victims get the opportunity to say that, right? Because
Right.
so
Were you ever? Did you ever do the countdown to like when he gets out? Were you ever nervous about him finding you, or?
Yeah, I was, but I moved to the Middle East then, right? So by the time he was out, I was living like 4 time zones away. So, and again, because I wasn't even living in Belfast, there was always this kind of safety cushion in terms of the geography, and also again because we came from such different like places in our lives and in society, like rare.
Maybe here's another question I thought of that I hadn't really thought of before, because I don't do my social media ever, or nor would I like everything on social, right? I was thinking about like the whole concept of being found, right? But the concept of being found by your rapist or any rapist, right? By being tracked or stalked or targeted, right? There's so many millions of women who don't think twice about the fact that they're putting everything out there, I guess. And it's something I personally don't relate to at all, because I feel like, I guess for me, it was like I already had too many photos of myself taken at age 18 by random photographers for the news. So I hate getting my picture. I don't like any part of the camera. But for yourself, like, I think it's so fascinating to think of like the fearless traveler warrior that you are. And then I guess how you also manifest that in the public space of online. We're doing the podcast, but generic backdrop, who knows where we are. So I guess how do you feel now just in general about vulnerability in any space, right? Like, are you very thoughtful about where you put your presence?
I'm a big fan of kind of instinct, right? So I suppose, when there's this thing about, even during this, like just before the assault, like instinctively, I'm like, okay, this is a dangerous person. But, as I described in the last episode, like I didn't have anywhere to go. So I kind of feel like instinctually I can figure out what I feel comfortable doing or not. But, there's definitely times where I wouldn't say overdone it, but like I think the activist drive sometimes drives us to kind of like exhaust ourselves, right? So I was in like an Irish television documentary that came out in 2017, and so again, so it's called Unbreakable True Lives, and it was a kind of portrait where they like featured 4 different rape victims, either who were Irish or were in Ireland at the time, and I'm good friends with the filmmaker now, and there were great intentions, and I think it is a really powerful documentary. I wouldn't personally want to watch it myself because like what right? But there were, and I did it obviously because I was on board with the whole messaging. But the documentary did involve me flying back to Belfast to go into the park where I was assaulted, right? And so they wanted like a camera, like recording my reaction and all that. And again, kind of as a creative project and as a project addressing my own recovery and my own trauma, like I was like, no, this is interesting, right? But it got to the point where, so they filmed me in London all day just talking about the assault, and like that's exhausting, right? And I hadn't quite realized that so the camera crew left, and I was like, okay, I'm like completely wiped, right? So it was like 2 days to recover from that. And then like a few months later, I had to fly over to Belfast and go to the park, and they were filming me in the park, walking back into the park and just trying to get my emotional reaction. And again, because I was on board with the filmmakers and it was an all-female team, like I was ostensibly okay with it, but I also kind of had to negotiate to get paid for some of that, because I was like, I don't like, this is like a day or two of my life, right? And it's kind of my trauma. This is your content, right? So, and I hadn't really thought about that in advance, but a lot of it was like, why have I volunteered to go back into this park? And so, I mean, I don't know if that answers the question. For me, I'm still glad I did it, but sometimes the desire to spread the message, or to kind of to speak out about these issues can drive us to exhaustion, right? So I've kind of learned in the past years, like, kind of when to scale back, I suppose. But there definitely were periods in my life where I'm like, every single thing I was doing, and I'm sure you've been through experience like periods like this before yourself, where like, can I go 24 hours and not think about rape, right? And not have to speak about rape.
Yeah. That's pretty rare, but those are nice days.
Yeah. So in terms of like being found, people can Google me and they can find out, I mean, if somebody decided to put a whole search together, they could probably figure out where I am. But, there's a part of me, after you become a victim of this kind of crime, you're always going to feel vulnerable. And there's always a sense of, I don't even walk down. Do I want to walk down the street late at night in the dark, right? Because things can happen. But that's an approach you can have to anything in life, right? So I could have used that to kind of hold me back from traveling or from doing anything. And I always kind of would have to reverse that and be like, yeah, but I mean, the worst possible thing short of me dying has already happened. So I may as well just go out there and keep doing the things I want to do, right? But there was this kind of sort of psychological thing where I'm like, okay, I'm going to show them, or I'm going to still do this despite this thing having happened to me. So yeah. I don't know where that leaves me, because I was in the middle of saying something. But
no, you're fine. You were just kind of talking about the writing of the book, and I guess when you completed the book, I'm curious, like, how long it took you to start thinking about the next one.
Oh, well, I mean, the thing is, like, completing the book was fine, and again, with the writing process, even though I was writing Vivian's perspective and then I'd switch back to Johnny's, actually Johnny's perspective was more interesting for me because it was more productive. It wasn't reliving the worst period of my life. So I was allowed to kind of exercise, like, push myself a bit more as a writer, and also trying to find moments of, I don't want to say like a connection with Johnny, but, as a young individual trying to figure out how do I show him being vulnerable, and how do I show him and his insecurities, which could then maybe explain the way he acts, right? So it was about like, okay, giving him a sense of humor, giving him the ability to like notice something beautiful, like the moonlight falling on the field, and again, trying to see that person as an individual and as a human. So that was an interesting exercise for me as an artist. Then I finished the book, and then it was a nightmare to get a book deal, right? So, and I don't even know if I want to go into that, but it was like a heartbreaking process. And I had like three different publishers at various points offer me a book deal, and then retracted it for things they were worried I wouldn't be able to handle the publicity because I was a rape victim and I might have a breakdown. They were scared of being sued by my perpetrator, right, or being sued for libel. So there was all these things that were connected to the real life nature of my case, which then resulted in me losing book deals. And people are like, I can't believe that happened. It's like, no, it does happen, right? You get offered book deals and then they can get retracted. So that was really heartbreaking. But in the end, the book did come out, and it did win a number of awards. It was, it was nominated for, and it won. It won the Guardian Not the Booker Prize, and it got translated into like 10 different languages. So there was kind of that sense of reward afterwards, not so much financial, but more in terms of critical reward and attention, because people read it and they're like, oh no, I really related to this book. Or I had men reading the book that then cried and said like, okay, I can understand a bit more now what this crime does to women. So that meant a lot to me. But at the same time, the book came out in 2017. So it came out in June 2017 in the UK. It came out in October 2017 in the US, which also coincided with the documentary airing in Ireland, but also coincided with Me Too and the Weinstein allegations in October 2017.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So in some ways that maybe boosted my book a little bit, but then it also led to my agent saying, well, what are you going to write for your second book? And me saying like, oh, like there's this like historical idea I've always wanted to write, which is set in Elizabethan London. And they're like, oh, well, that's nice. But, you're now known as a feminist writer and you write suspense and this thing has just happened, the Me Too, Will Harvey Weinstein thing, and you used to work in the film industry, so you'd be really well placed to write a novel about that. And me just thinking like, oh my God, I don't want to write another book about sexual violence, right? So a lot of it was about how do I figure out, but then obviously ideologically I felt, it was important to address. So I think for me, it was about how do I write about Weinstein allegations, later convictions, Me Too, the film industry in a way which was appealing for me as an author and not again about beating an obvious drum. But and you don't want to say, you don't want to call it an obvious drum, but it should be pretty obvious that the film industry is not a safe place for young women to work, but trying to make it an interesting creative project for me. Yeah. So for me, it was about writing it from the perspective of a woman who at 39 no longer works in the film industry, but 10 years ago had been the assistant to a Weinstein type figure. And her then trying to think like, actually, was I somehow responsible? Was I somehow complicit in the things that happened to other women? But at the same time, she didn't have much power in the industry. And so I was trying to kind of paint a portrait of an entire industry that abuses and exploits young people's talent and willingness to work hard and can exploit them in different ways. So, but it was also about kind of my love of film, but my kind of frustration with the industry. Because by that point, I guess, because I lost my entire film producing career after the assault. So even though I wasn't assaulted within the context of the film industry, part of me still missed the fact that I didn't work in the industry. So a lot of it was about looking back on the industry and realizing, okay, this was actually a really unequal and quite dangerous place to work, even though it's glamorous supposedly and exciting at the same time.
So that was Complicit, the next book. Yeah. So and that. How long did it take you to put that together?
Well, I had a child in the middle, right? So what's interesting is all these things that I feared losing, when I was being choked, right? To go back to that cognitive behavior therapy session, I have since managed to do, right? So I was worried I'd never be able to write a book. Well, I've now written and published 3 books, and I was worried I'd never be able to travel again. I've done that. And I think for me, like the missing puzzle piece, I don't want to call it that because, it's not like anything needs to be completed, right? But, for me, I just felt like it was impossible for me to ever find, a rewarding romantic relationship in the wake of what had happened to me. And I'd become so, I suppose, jaded and cynical about love and romance, right? And so, I'd had, not the most rewarding experience dating in London. I mean, London is a really notoriously difficult city to date in anyway. And so by the time I was kind of 39, 40, I'm like, I just give up. Like, like what's the point of trying to meet somebody? I'm wasting my time going on these dates or like thinking something's going to happen and then somebody ghosts me or whatever, right? And it was really kind of unrewarding. And I'd had some really bad, I'd had like a terrible breakup with like a guy who said the worst possible thing you could say to a rape victim. And so that's in Dark Chapter, right? So I kind of put that breakup conversation in Dark Chapter because I'm like, you can't just make an offhand comment to a rape victim like that, right? And that just put me off of dating or relationships with men and like for such a long time. But then, part of me had always wanted to become a mother. So I was like, I don't even know how am I going to become a mother if I don't meet someone, all this kind of stuff. So I actually had frozen my eggs. So I spent like a decent chunk of money because I've never had a huge amount of money in my life. Certainly then in my 30s. And so I spent a decent chunk of money freezing my eggs, thinking like, okay, maybe someday I'll be able to become a mother. I didn't have a huge amount of eggs frozen in the long run. So, but then like quite unexpectedly in 2018, I did meet somebody, right? And then I really unexpectedly became pregnant 3 months later. So by middle of 2019, I was pregnant, or like spring of 2019, I was pregnant. I'm like at the age of 40. And so, if you're pregnant at the age of 40, like that's kind of life's last chance saying like, this is the last chance to become a mother, right?
Oh, God.
So
Yeah, that's a lot.
yeah, and it was kind of amazing because I by that point I'd sort of given up on ever becoming a mother, because I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm ever going to meet someone, and like there's like too much baggage related to men and relationships and sex and stuff. But then like unexpectedly this thing happened. So yeah, and I'm a big believer of just like kind of going with what life throws at you. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna have this child, right, with this person whom I hardly know, right? So I was in the middle of writing Complicit at the time. So that was kind of the middle of 2019. And then I had my child by the end of 2019, and so I had tried to sell the book. I tried to get the book finished and sold before then. I changed literary agents, and they were just like, "It's not ready yet." And I was like, "Oh my God, how am I going to finish this book once I have a child?" Then I had the child. Then COVID happened, right? And then
All that at once.
but then
Everything all at once.
yeah,
Everything all at once.
so this
Yeah.
COVID lockdown, and I have this newborn with a person that I've known for like just over a year at this point, right? And we're like, okay, we're raising this child in lockdown. But again, one of the golden linings or silver linings, I suppose, that happened with lockdown was that my partner was able to be home more, because nobody could work. And so I was able to say like, oh, actually, if you're around, like I can now focus on my writing like for an hour a day. So I kind of set myself like by around Easter time. So this has been like 6 months after the assault. Oh my God, I just confused that, but like 6 months after I gave birth, right? But those are the kinds of life-changing things that happen, right? You have an assault and your life changes afterwards, or you have a child and your life changes afterwards. And there's some things that like you can't really reverse. So I guess 6 months after I had the child, I said, okay, I'm going to start working on this novel again. So I said, okay, once an hour a day, I'm going to be able to hand the baby over to my partner and focus on writing. And then I was able to kind of extend it to 2 hours a day. So by kind of June, July of that year, I actually had finished a decent draft. I mean, it was my third draft at the time. And then my agent sold it later on, a few months later. So yeah, I mean, I was able to finish it, but I mean, that was 2020. The book didn't come out until 2022. So yeah, I mean, and then I was also juggling my PhD at the time. So it was kind of like a whole bunch of different things happening, where it was like trying to juggle, being a mother, and then also having an author career, and then also doing my PhD. And by that point, kind of like the overt activism around sexual violence had retreated a bit, because in 2015 and 2017, I ran these like arts festivals using the arts. It's called Clear Lines, to address sexual violence and assault and consent. And realize, well, okay, maybe my activism is going to come through writing. And like that was really rewarding to have done that. And it was great to realize there's a whole community of other survivors.
Can you go back to what you just mentioned, to the activism part, and tell our listeners more about what that was that you were doing?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, how do I tell this? So 2013 was when I finally realized I wanted to write Dark Chapter, right? So I was, by that point, I was working in Singapore, and I had this corporate job, which I then quit because I was like, I just want to write this book now, right? So in 2013, I moved back to London, enrolled in a master's in creative writing at Goldsmiths, specifically with the focus of working on that novel. And when I was working on the novel, that was me finally like addressing sexual violence and assault through writing. And I was starting to notice there were lots of other writers and creators who were creating art about this lived experience, and just maybe realizing like, oh, this other art should be seen, and there should be some kind of platform where we can all engage with it. So I decided to create an arts festival that that just created that platform where, so we had about 400 people came over like 4 days, and I just kind of, I crowdfunded, and I, got enough money to make it happen. And we just, we had like a spoken word showcase, and then we had a one act play showcase. We had film screenings, and then what else do we have? I know there's like stand-up comedy, right? Because there's a bunch of feminist comedians who like want to address these issues as well in kind of a funny way. And then we had different panel discussions with people that work in public prosecution and police that work on these issues, or panel discussions about how do you talk to your children about child sexual abuse. So it was kind of bringing together artists, but then also, I guess, frontline workers and maybe researchers, and then also just obviously opening out and hoping that members of the public who cared about this issue would come. So we kind of had a 4-day festival, and it was great. It was a lot of work to put together. I gave myself like 3.5 months to put it together, but I'd worked in arts festivals before, right? I'd run a film festival when I was in Doha, so I was able to kind of put together all the skills I'd had to create this space, which I thought was really important. And it was great. And then we ended up having a second festival in 2017, but it just got to be so much work. And by that point, I was busy with my own writing. I was busy with my PhD, and we would just have to like keep raising money to make these things happen. And I was just like, I don't actually want to be out there raising money, right? I want to be creating my own stuff. So in some ways we kept having events. We went online. We have a podcast. We ended up writing. There's like an online creative writing guide for survivors that we've put out there, and that's free to download. So I can send you the link for that. So it was all about using the arts to address these issues. And I found it immensely rewarding, but also at the same time, putting that space together meant having less time to create my own art, I suppose. So that's why I decided to kind of focus on the writing more. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks for explaining that part.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, my gosh, so child is born, writing book, published book,
Yeah.
and then finished PhD.
Yeah, and that was hell. Like my PhD was hell. Like I don't even want to go. Yeah, it's probably the hardest thing I've done, short of surviving my rape and having to deal with like the legal side of things. And that part of that was because academia isn't necessarily like the best fit for these issues, like all the kind of messiness and the rawness of trauma and the emotional aspect of it. I just found it to be really, and maybe it's me as an artist as well, I just found it really weird to be operating in an academic space where it was all like dry theory and like and also I was at the London School of Economics, so it was very social sciences. So I just found it actually quite difficult as a victim survivor artist, to be operating in that space and having to, tick all these boxes to make something academically robust and stuff. So it ended up taking me 9 years to finish my PhD. And part of that was because I got really busy as an author. I also became a mother. Lockdown, COVID happened. So any number of things happened that made it more difficult. But I guess what got me through it was I ended up doing the PhD on sort of the emotional labor of rape survivors who speak publicly about their rape with the media. So some of the things we were speaking about before, and asking, so I was kind of interviewing other survivors that I knew, that I'd known through our activism, and just asking them, like, well, why did you go public, right? And what did you gain from doing that? What were the costs of going public? What's the cost of being that visible as a rape survivor? In some ways, was it worth it? And kind of asking, like, what was your relationship with the media like? Did they treat you well, or did they exploit you? And there's all these different ways, and I'm sure you can answer a lot of this as well, Katie, with your own experience. Like, there's all these different ways in which we kind of like don't realize, the way the media makes use of our trauma as content, right? So kind of looking at that, and that was interesting, right? Because I hadn't really come across other academic research that looked at that. But I mean, right.
Winnie, let's talk about that for a second. Our trauma is content, and I'm just thinking about other types of, it's just like bad news sells best, right? The ticker tape, you don't see like all is well in the world across the red line at the bottom. So bad news sells best means there's something to me unique about the trauma of a sex crime, right? That's it's almost more titillating. And look at what's going on. It's like, as long as Epstein is every day, it's like we hear about like a couple perpetrators every single day when there are thousands of perpetrators, hundreds of thousands, right? But then it's whatever is, and why sex crimes? Like, it's just, instead of all the other crimes, like, right? It's just whatever is most controversial, but there's something uniquely exploitable about the sexual trauma, I think. I don't know. I hadn't thought about it exactly that way until you said it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Until you said Yeah, I was just thinking about like how the media does, and even me on the cover of Time
Mm,
magazine, right? Like that look I had that was crafted by the photographer
yeah,
they hired, right?
yeah,
So I'm just thinking about the two of us, and then also like all these other ones, like, and just and how special and important this
mm,
little podcast
yeah,
is for talking about it, and like survivors with survivors, right? Instead of like you're being interviewed by
yeah,
me.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
I'm not a reporter. I'm just like, let's figure this stuff out and talk about it. And I think that's also I get to talk to you, right? So I kind of like thinking about it differently, about the uniqueness of this little space we have, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but anyway, sorry, I just got it. I thought in my head I wanted to
No, but
say
that's
it.
true. I mean, and I think
um,
there's something special about the kind of the survivor to survivor kind of interaction, right? Because this isn't being filtered through the media. It's not, if people want to tune in and listen, that's great. Like none of us are making money off of this, right? So it's really just about sharing our experiences, but in a way which is honest and open. And I think once something becomes commodified, right? Once your trauma is being turned into a headline, or here's like an exclusive with this rape victim,
right.
then suddenly it's like, oh no, that's become a product that this media platform is benefiting from, right? And some of it
Yeah.
comes down to compensation, and some of it's like, we're being asked to share our trauma with the public, right? And when I signed up to that, sorry, my laptop keeps sliding around on my lap.
I was like, are we on the ship? We're in the
At a
ocean.
desk, right? But sitting in an orange chair. But when I agreed to do that documentary, sure, like I did it, was ideologically aligned with what I wanted to do, but then I underestimated the amount of labor it was emotionally and also kind of communicatively.
Yeah.
And so I think that, oftentimes we overdo that because we don't realize that actually what we're doing, which is ideologically important for us, is also labor. And it's also a very specific skill set, right? Which we've kind of, those of us who do it, we've honed over, years of experience, right? And
Right.
and so being able to, if TV called me up, right, if any Sky News, or if a television channel called me up and said like, oh, can you appear tomorrow and talk about your rape, in the context of this news story, like I could do it, right? It's something where it's like I've reached the point where emotionally it's not difficult for me to go on live television to talk about my trauma, but it did take me years to do this. And if you want me to give you sound
Right.
bites and also speak authentically and speak in a way that I feel is true to the experience and sound intelligent at the same time, that's a specific skill set, and like that should be recognized as a skill set. But of course, media platforms being what they are, like, oh no, it's just, you're a victim and you're giving your true experience. But there's not.
You're so lucky to be on our show.
Yeah,
And you must drop everything and take this car and be on the show in an hour
yeah,
in New York City, right?
yeah,
It's just like insane.
yeah,
That it's the
yeah.
ego
And
media.
I remember
The
interviewing.
egomania of the
What
media.
is it?
I was going to say the egomania of the media.
Yeah,
Like they just think like, you're so lucky to be on our screen.
yeah,
And I'm like, no, you're lucky to have me.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Because like you said, Winnie, and the other thing I was just reflecting upon is like, it's not you and I talking or me talking with any of the others on the show. It's not exactly talk therapy for the two of us, but it helps. Like I like thinking with you about and like learning and also just going back into different parts of my life,
yeah,
right? Like especially now where I'm much older. And so I did the kid thing and that was hard. It's like when you said the kid thing was hard at 40, the twins thing was hard because I'm like, how am I going to have babies and go and give public
yeah,
speeches and be pregnant? Here's something weird, Winnie. Like, I was like, can I talk about being 18 and being raped when my belly is out to here
yeah,
on the stage? I was like, what is the audience going to think about when I'm that pregnant?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
It was just so many different questions that you clearly. I love how intentional you are about a lot of things, Winnie. It's just
Oh,
I
I
really
don't
love
feel
it.
I
No,
just feel like
I think
intuitive
you're
about things, but
I know, but I feel you've got this like yin and yang of intuition and some impulse and that artistic side, but I still think you're also very cerebral and like determined and clear-minded at like both. You're the best of both.
All right, I'll take that. But I mean, but interestingly, because I was in a shoot for Cosmopolitan magazine in the UK when I was heavily pregnant. So again, it was like Cosmopolitan being like, "Hey, we're gonna do this photo shoot with rape survivors, and just show where people can talk about their experiences with the criminal justice process." But of course, it was for Vogue. No, it wasn't for Vogue. It was for Cosmopolitan, right? So it was again this thing where it's like, I mean, they weren't going to pay us. Fine, fair enough, right? But it's like, here we'll send. Yeah, I had asked for a car to like, pick me up because I was heavily pregnant, right? So it's like, here's what photo shoots happening, and yet there was this thing where it's like, we want you to be wearing this color palette, so like white, cream, or beige, right? So because again, it's for Cosmopolitan, so there's art direction, in every aspect of kind of what they photograph, right? So and I guess part of their messaging was like, here's these like pure rape victims who've been victimized, right? So we're not gonna do flashy colors, we're gonna do like white, cream, or beige, right? So I was like, okay, listen, I'm heavily pregnant. You want this color palette? I'm like, you're Cosmopolitan. Like, can you provide some wardrobe? Like, I don't, do you want me to run out and buy maternity beige dress kind of thing? Right? So so I kind of pushed back on that. But again, it was this thing where because I had worked in the media and I used to work in the film industry, like, I know that Cosmopolitan, like, they do have the budget for this. They do have staff that can figure out the wardrobe. So I was like, yeah, and can you just send a car because I don't want to have to, pay for my own cab there, right? But other people were so excited to be in this Cosmopolitan shoot that they ran out and they bought all their whole wardrobe, right? So there was this whole aspect of being the women that were being featured. Some of them were really excited to be in the shoot, and part of me was like, okay, fine, like I guess it's flattering, sure, but at the same time, this is our story and our face, and our bodies that you're using as content, right? For your, admittedly for like a meaningful kind of spread, but it's content for your fashion magazine, right? So, and the sad thing about it was that, I think it would have been great for us all to be there together. But the way photo shoots happen is like everybody has to go through hair and makeup, everybody has to have, their whatever 20, 30 minutes with the photographer. So obviously made more sense for everybody to be spaced out, but it would have been more rewarding for us to have all met together, right? But that, the way that the production works is, you got to space everybody out. So you end up becoming like quite atomized and individualized from each other. But I was heavily pregnant. So I remember thinking like, oh, well, okay, it's Cosmopolitan, like maybe they don't want to show a pregnant woman, or maybe I'm vain enough where I don't want people to see me. And then I was just like, well, whatever. I mean, the whole message is that you can be raped and years later you can become a mother. And so that's part of the human experience. And so why should I have to hide the fact that I'm heavily pregnant, right? But it's that kind of like, as you raised it with your experience, that kind of like, oh, is there a clash of images here, or kind of like that people have about rape victims and motherhood? But I mean, the reality is many women have had both experiences, and one should, and obviously we know for me, my own birthing process was unexpectedly kind of, there were not quite flashbacks, but as a victim of sexual assault, I found certain parts of the afterbirth process to be actually like pretty, not, I wouldn't say traumatizing, but quite difficult emotionally in ways I wouldn't have expected. And so, yeah, these are the layerings of experience you can have as a woman, but, I'm glad that we can go on and survive and end up becoming mothers later on in our lives.
Yeah. For sure. I guess maybe in the last 5 minutes, Winnie, what else? We could talk about the last book, What We Left Unsaid.
Yeah, no, I'd love that. Yeah, and so I finally finished my PhD, and so that was hell. And then but before I finished it, I also had to write. It was a 2-book deal, so I had to write the draft of a second book, right? And so part of me is somebody who's always wanted to be a writer. It's like, this is amazing. I can write whatever I want. But I think Complicit didn't sell as well commercially as my publishers would have liked. And various things happened within publishing. So I was kind of like, nobody was actually giving me a clear direction on what I should write next. I'm like, okay, I'll just come up with something myself, right? So I realized I didn't want to write about sexual violence again. So because I already had the book deal, I was like, well, I can actually write whatever I want. So I love traveling. So I realized I wanted to write a road trip novel. So I did that. And again, it was using writing as a way to kind of foster my own interests and my own passions. So I gave birth in 2019, then there was COVID in 2020. And so during lockdown, I started thinking, okay, how can I travel now that I'm a mother and there's COVID? And I realized that actually I can still go on a road trip in the US, right? Because as an American citizen, I can fly back to the US during COVID and you can travel with a baby in a car. So I pitched to my partner, I'm like, why don't we fly to America? And we can fly to Chicago and we can stay with friends and we'll rent a car and we'll drive. And I'll drive because he didn't even have a driver's license at the time because he lives in London. So I was like, I'll drive, the 3 weeks from Chicago along Route 66 to see my parents in California, and you just have to help look after the baby, right? And my partner's like, "What, are you crazy?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I've always wanted to do the Great American Road Trip, and I have an idea for a novel, and this is research for the novel." So I kind of came up with the idea for the novel to give myself an excuse to go on the road trip, right? To drive Route 66. It was also just me being a little bit crazy and being like, yeah, we can do this. We've got, the 20-month-old and we've got a car seat and we can just drive in the car. And so it was on one hand, like pretty stressful to do, but on the other hand, that was fodder for my next book. And the book really, it still deals with sexual violence on some level, but it's mainly about 3 estranged adult siblings who are Asian American who are kind of tasked by their mother to meet up in California. And so she has an operation she has had a stroke, and she's like, listen, I have an operation next month and I want the 3 of you to meet me in California. But before you do that, I want you to drive and go to the Grand Canyon before you come to California. And that was because 30 years ago when they were all kids, their whole family had tried to drive from California to Arizona to visit the Grand Canyon. And at the last minute, something happened at the gas station. They kind of turned around. And so the kids never really understood why they never made it to the Grand Canyon. But the mother, at the end of her life, obviously kind of wants to create this opportunity for her estranged children to come together and to see this thing that they never got to see before. And so, you have 3 very different siblings who just they voted different ways politically. They're different, they've gone very different ways in their adult lives. Financially, they're in different situations. And so during the course of this road trip, they're kind of forced to confront what happened during the previous road trip. And so they're sort of piecing together the mystery of what happened back in 1991. So it's kind of definitely me trying to turn away from writing suspense, because I, again, as a victim of crime, I'm like, I don't feel a bit weird about there being an entire genre that creates entertainment out of violence and trauma, but then also trying to embrace themes of travel, and then kind of buried at like many levels down, there's this kind of story of intergenerational trauma, which their family's never spoken about. So in some ways, it's me as an author trying to sort of step back from the issue of sexual violence while still acknowledging the impact of trauma, but then also kind of embrace travel and stuff. So, so I enjoyed writing it. And I think I've had a really nice response on the book. But again, it's this thing where because it's not about sexual violence, it's not about Me Too, it's not been, like, my publishers haven't been promoting it in such a big way because it's not like sexy and edgy. But, I mean, that, whatever, you can't always write books that are seen as sexy and edgy. For me, this is much more of a healing book, and it's about kind of just being able to repair our relationships with our family, like decades on, which is an important kind of message, I think. So, yeah.
Definitely. Well, Winnie, we'll just have to wait for book number 4 someday.
Yeah.
I'm certain you'll have more ideas along the way. I like the direction you're headed, though. It does sound really grounding and like where you need to be, right?
Yeah.
And as your kiddo grows up, I'm sure you'll have more thoughts on that. It's part of your life too.
Yeah. And we've been dealing with, like, how do we broach the topic of what happened to my son? I mean, he's only 6 years old, because obviously you don't want him to know about these kinds of things at that age, but when is the right age to tell him, especially because I'm so public about it, and because, do we want one of his friends to tell him, oh, your mom's a rape victim kind of thing, right? So we're not quite sure how to address that, but, I feel like we've still got a few years before it's an issue. So, yeah.
Just a couple. Yeah, it'll go fast. Well, I'm so glad we did part 2, and thank you for taking some more time. out of your schedule, and I wrote a note about the creative writing for survivors guide. So in addition to promoting your books, I'll make sure we find a link to that and put it out there.
Yeah, for sure.
But thank you for your generosity and your all the great things.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed our talk. And for anything else you want to leave the listeners with?
No, just to follow whatever path life throws at you in some ways, and to kind of, I guess, follow your instincts. And and sometimes if I think about all the different ways I could have made a decision to keep at that job in Singapore, or I could have decided not to have my child, right? And so there, we do have choices that we're presented with, but I guess just go with your instinct and what feels right at the time. And that's the best you can do, really. And I think if you're just going with your instinct, then generally you're going with what you want to actually do in life, right? So I think for me, I've tended to roll with the punches, and it hasn't got me in the wrong place. So I'm a big believer in our ability to just kind of make the right decision when we're in the moment. So yeah.
Well, thanks for that's a good confidence building statement too. So thanks for that as well. And until next time, thank you, Winnie, and to our listeners. That journal, I hope you're keeping. This is logbook number 2 for Winnie. So, and don't hesitate to go find her books. I think even reading the book and coming back to the interview will be really an interesting meld of, different perspectives all blended. So thank you, and take care, Winnie.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dear Katie. These conversations are never easy, but they're always necessary, and we're so grateful you chose to share this space with us. If something in today's episode stirred something within you, please give yourself what you need. Whether that's rest, support, or just a deep breath, you're not alone. To hear more stories, resources, and survivor-centered conversations, be sure to subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We want to hear from you, so please leave us a review and share your feedback. Your thoughts help us create episodes that resonate with listeners. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.